you're taking notes, I've titled tonight's message, Preparation for the Work. Now, just a quick overview or a flyby of chapter 1. If you've missed our study last week, Nehemiah, he tells us exactly who he is, and he is a cupbearer. Now, what that means is he would accompany the king everywhere he went, and he would make sure that any food or drink that the king would eat, Nehemiah got first dibs on it. He got to try it out and make sure that it wasn't poisoned. And then once you saw that Nehemiah, the cupbearer, was all good, then the king would eat. And it was a pretty good job. He got to eat like a king, and he was paid for it. But it was far more than just a glorified food taster, a food critic. It was far more than that, because he was in the king's ear constantly. In fact, many people would say that the cupbearer was closer to the king than anyone, with the exception of the king's own family. And he was looked to as an advisor to the king, and the king would confide within his cupbearer, Nehemiah, for all of the economical, social, and political dealings within the nation. And Nehemiah was used in this place. He tells us exactly who he was, that he was the king's cupbearer. And in this time, as he was just working, just a normal day within his job, he receives a message from his brother. And his brother, he tells him that the walls of their home city, Jerusalem, are in ruin, and the people are suffering for it. So he receives this message, and his response to it was that he wept, he prayed, and he fasted. He was destroyed because of this news. And so what happened was that Nehemiah, he then went on and prayed, and the majority of chapter 1, we can look and see his prayer, his heart wide open before God, saying, God, this is devastating to me. He's asking the Lord to do something. He's asking the Lord that the Lord would give him favor amongst his king and dealing with his king. Now, I want you to capture this, that the theme of Nehemiah, the theme of this book, is that Nehemiah first agonized before he organized. He agonized within prayer and within the calling that God has given him and set before him. He agonized before he organized and he executed on the things that God has directed him to. Before God called him to do something great, Nehemiah cared deeply about it. He had to be brought to that place where he agonized over it. Now, let's just take a look at verse number 1 of chapter 2. It says this, "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes." Now, right there, in verse number 1, it tells us the month that this is in. Now we're in the month of Nisan, which unless you are a Jewish calendar scholar, that might not mean anything to you, but we're looking right around the time of April. Now, Nehemiah, back in chapter 1 at the very beginning, it tells us when Nehemiah got his news, and it was in the month of Chislev, which is in December. Now, it's been an entire 4 months of heartbroken prayer with absolutely no progress. Nehemiah was agonizing over prayer for this, but he saw no progress that was being made. And I wonder if Nehemiah ever got discouraged, or if he ever wondered if God was even hearing his prayers. Maybe he thought that he was wasting his time praying. Now, being patient for God to answer a prayer really develops meaning to a verse that many of you know in Psalm 46:10, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." It's difficult to be still. It's difficult to experience that agonizing prayer and seeing little to no progress. But when you wait for the Lord in prayer, you're not wasting your time. You're investing it, and God is preparing both you and also your circumstances so that his purposes may be accomplished. But it just so happened to pass that there was one day in the month of Nisan, Nehemiah was being used in a very powerful way. And that's just how every single work of God's hand happens. It's just one day came and it came to pass, and you were just there and you got to experience God move. Now imagine if Nehemiah just decided, man, I'm gonna call in sick today. You know how at the end of the year you have a certain amount of sick days at work, and you're like, well, I don't feel sick, but I gotta use it or lose it, so I'm a little sick. I don't know, like if he had those opportunities to just take sick days, but imagine if he took a sick day and he would have missed the working of God's hand and God's Spirit in and through his life. But God wanted to use him in a very powerful way. Let's continue reading. Back in verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass that in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, When wine was before him, I took the wine and gave to the king, and now I had never been sad in his presence before. Whoa, that is quite the statement. Verse number 2, therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing more but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid. Now, in the Persian courts, it was against the law to act sad in the king's presence. Now, they did this as a protectionary measure so that, emotions are very contagious, especially the negative emotions. They didn't want those emotions to be brought onto the king. So it was against the law, and you could be banished, or get this, you could even be killed for appearing sad in the king's presence. Now, remember Queen Esther, right? Why did Esther become queen in the first place? Well, it's because Queen Esther, her predecessor, Queen Vashti, she refused to come to the king at his command. And so what the king ended up doing was he did a little switcheroo, right? He did a wife swap, right? I'm going to get rid of you, Queen Vashti. I'm going to find a new queen, and selected Queen Esther. Now, that was all because Queen Vashti chose to refuse to listen to the summons of the king. Now, they had some really, really stringent laws that they followed here. So it was very dangerous grounds for Nehemiah. It was very dangerous for him to appear sad, and he had to be very careful with what his next steps would be. But the king, he recognized that it was a sorrow of heart. And since God gave Nehemiah favor with the king, King Artaxerxes, he listened to Nehemiah. So if you're taking notes, idea number 1 for our study is God is working on your behalf. We'll go ahead, we'll keep reading, starting in verse 2 all the way through 9. It says this, therefore the king said to me, why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid. I would too if I was Nehemiah. And said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad, when the city, the place of my father's tomb, lies in waste, and its gates are burned with fire? Then the king said to me, what do you request? So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king and all your servants have found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tomb, that I may rebuild it. Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, how long will your journey be? And when will you return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. Therefore, I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah. And a letter from Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber that I may make beams for the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city walls and for the house that I will occupy. And the king granted me all of these according to the good hand of my God upon me. Then I went to the governors in the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. Now, Nehemiah here, he's facing before the king, and the king asks him this question, why are you sad? And I love to call it a shotgun prayer. He just throws up this really quick shotgun prayer to the Lord, because if you were even silent in the king's presence, it would be considered treason, and you'd be done for. No more cupbearer, right? And so he gives this quick shotgun prayer where maybe he's just saying, God, help me. God, I just need you. God, give me wisdom. And he then moves on to answer the king. Now, those prayers are good, but just understand that those prayers were backed up with 4 months of prayer behind it. It wasn't just those shotgun prayers that Nehemiah gave to the Lord, but he was asking for wisdom. And the beautiful thing is that God tells us, if you lack wisdom, ask and I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you liberally. And that's a beautiful promise that God has given to us. Now, Nehemiah's answer to the king, it reveals something about him. That not only was he a man of fierce prayer, he was also a man of planning. That he planned his steps. And during the 4 months that Nehemiah had time to think and plan, he did his homework. He knew exactly what he needed in order to accomplish this. He even knew the name of the keeper of the king's forest, and he mentioned him by name. Now, Nehemiah, he was a planner. And just in that, I'm reminded of Proverbs 16:9, where it says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. It's vital for us as believers to step out and to start planning those things, to plan our steps and be flexible for wherever the Lord wants to lead us. But those two things are very necessary. There's a responsibility from us to plan, and then from God for us to submit to the leading of his Holy Spirit. Now note this, that Nehemiah, he was submissive to human authority. And notice that he asked the king that he didn't just say, I'm going to do this whether you like it or not, right? Instead, he trusted that God can work in and through human authority. Even in his speech was very tactful. First, he said, may the king live forever. He's saying, hey, king, I'm sad. Yes, that's true, but it's not because of you. It's not because of anything that you're doing. May you live forever, king. So he's very tactful in that. And then he also brings him into his mindset. He basically says, how would you feel if you were in my place and the city of your ancestors were in ruins? He was extraordinarily tactful with how he presented it to the king. Now remember what Nehemiah was praying for all the way back in chapter 1. Verse 11, I love what it says in the NLT. It says, please grant me success today by making the king favorable to me and put it into his heart to be kind to me. That was his direct prayer. It's a good thing that he was praying because the Lord answered it and how the king responded to him. Now, Nehemiah was asking for the Lord to alter the king's heart. Now, flip in your Bibles to, you can keep your finger where it's at right now, but flip in your Bibles to Proverbs 21:1. I would love for you to see this within your own Bible. And here's what it says. It'll be on the screen behind me as well, but it says, the king's heart is like streams of water that are directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever he pleases. It doesn't matter if the king is a pagan. It doesn't matter if he's a believer. It doesn't matter. That the heart of the king is like a stream of water in the Lord's hand, and he guides it. The literal meaning is he bends the will of the king to submit to God's authority. And I want you, in your own Bibles, you can circle that phrase, the king's heart, and off to the side, you can write my boss's heart, right? My boss's heart is moved like streams of water directed by the Lord. He guides it wherever he pleases. God is in control of all things. What little is one man of authority, but those who God has put in authority within our lives, God raises up, he puts down as he sees fit. They're there for a reason, and we should respect whatever that authority is because we know that God's hand is in it. Now notice this, that Nehemiah did all of his homework, and he knew everything that he needed to do to get this work done. He asked a lot from the king. If you just look at this portion of scripture, he really did ask a lot. He asked for, one, the permissions to go, the time off work, the time away from his own responsibilities, and a new title as the governor of Judah. He asked him for that. He also asked him for letters of approval, that he needed all of these stamped official documents saying that he was okay and permitted to go into these lands. He also asked for resources. That the trees in the king's forest, that Nehemiah would take those for resources. He was asking a lot from the king. And yet, because God was the one guiding the king's heart, the king gave more to Nehemiah than Nehemiah even asked for. Watch this, verse 9, the king sent a royal guard escort with captains and horsemen to make sure that Nehemiah got to his destination safely. That's not something that Nehemiah asked for. But here's the key. The key is that God always wants to give us more than we want to receive. God always wants to give us more, and it's because of his love for us. And he knows our needs even better than we know our own needs. Now capture this with me, that God gave Nehemiah favor with the king. He gave him favor with the king by his own job performance as the cupbearer, but on a greater extent, he gave him favor with the king by putting Esther in the position that she was as a queen 3.5 decades before Nehemiah even prayed for the walls of Jerusalem. Now, remember the story of Esther with me, right? Esther was a captive in a foreign land, and then she was selected to be the queen of the Persian king. All the while that this was happening, there was a plot to exterminate all of the Jews before the king. And Mordecai, who was Esther's cousin, he told her this in Esther 4, verse 14. It says this, "Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Who knows if this is why you were made queen, that God directed this and directed the heart of the king to place you in this position of power. Now, God used Esther to save the Jewish people back then. This is true. But know that God, he doesn't just use you and me as a one-hit wonder. He doesn't just do that with Esther. He doesn't do that with any of his servants. He doesn't use us as a one-hit wonder. Esther, she was the stepmother of the king, and in our study in Nehemiah, she was a stepmother of Artaxerxes. And it was likely that her influence on the family caused the king to look favorably, incline his heart towards Nehemiah. So not only was she queen for such a time as this, but God also put her there for such a time as that. Now the key is this, don't miss this, that God is working on our behalf for our needs even before we even know what our needs are. That he is working on our behalf decades before we even pray. This is the case for Nehemiah and for Esther, that God was already moving those pieces well in advance before we even recognized what our needs were. Now, follow me on this. I don't want to lose you. I can lose you easily because we're going to go through a couple of dates. But if you stick with me, you're going to be blessed. This is one of the most important dates within history. The exact date was March 14th, 445 BC. Now, from this date, 95 years earlier, Daniel prophesied that from the time permission was given to restore the walls in Jerusalem, there were about 70 sets of 7 years, and in that time, the Messiah would come. Daniel will be on the screen behind me. Daniel 9, verse 25, it says this, "Now listen and understand. 7 sets of 7 plus 62 sets of 7 will pass from the time the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem." So from that time that the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem, the appointed one comes. That's Jesus. That's the Messiah. And Jerusalem will be rebuilt with the streets and strong defenses despite the perilous times. Now we have that prophecy within Daniel. And Nehemiah, he comes in and he receives this permission from the king. And when you do the math on a lunar calendar, you come up with 173,880 days from the time that Nehemiah would rebuild the wall of Jerusalem to the time that the Messiah comes. That is the prophecy that we have from the book of Daniel. Now get this. 173,880 days from March 14th, 445 BC, will land us precisely on April 6th in the year 32 AD, on the same exact day that Jesus looked at his disciples and he told them to find him a colt that has never been ridden on, to bring that colt to him, where Jesus then sat on that colt and rode triumphantly into the city of Jerusalem. And the people cried out, "Hosanna, Hosanna." And God is so good and orchestrates with so much detail by his hand. And yet we still fail to trust God sometimes. We still fail to trust God with the little details of our life. God knows every single thing that you're walking through, and he wants to help you and bless you in those areas. Now let's go back into our study. Verse 10, all the way through 16. It says this: "When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel." Anti-Semitism has deep and ancient roots. And we're going to see these guys follow us through our story as irritations for Nehemiah as we keep on reading. Verse 11, it says, "So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days. Then I arose in the night, and a few men were with me. I told no one of what God had put on my heart to do at Jerusalem, nor was there any animal with me except the one which I rode. And I went out by night through the valley gate to the Serpent's Well and the Refuge Gate, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and its gates, which were burned with fire. Then I went to the Fountain Gate and to the King's Pool, but there was no room for the animals under me to pass. So I went up at night by the valley and viewed the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. So the officials did not know where I had gone or what I had done. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, or the others who did the work. Idea number 2 for our study is examine your life. Examine your life. Now, this was a 2-month journey for Nehemiah to get up and to go to Jerusalem. And notice what he did when he got to the city. That he took 3 days, and without talking to anyone, without telling anyone why he was there, he took those 3 days just to wait and be patient and walk around the city and observe and just see. If you were reading this quickly, you would imagine that Nehemiah, he's been planning this for 4 months. It's another 2-month journey, and he probably has everything in place. And the moment that he gets there, he's going to hire the subcontractors and get started on the work and get his shovel out. But instead, he waited these 3 days to walk around the city. And sometimes being still and waiting is far greater than coming up with this big, elaborate plan and executing it right away without thought. This allowed Nehemiah to capture a vision for what this project would look like and what this project would take to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now, I want to share something with you, that in the year 1501 AD, there was a great marble stone that was cut from a quarry in Italy, and then it was shipped to Florence. And many artisans, they looked at this marble and they decided exactly how they were going to etch into this, to make this beautiful masterpiece. But many of them saw this major flaw. There was a massive crack running down the middle of it. Many famous artisans, like Donatello, so many others, they rejected the stone and said, I can't work with something like this. It's going to fall and break apart. It's not usable. Until one man named Michelangelo looked at the stone and said, there's an angel trapped inside and I must set it free. He then got to work on this flawed stone and produced one of the most famous works of arts within all of history. It was Michelangelo's David, which still resides in the city of Florence. Now, God can see your flaws and see the cracks that are within your life, and he can still work in and through you to do great things. But you have to have vision to see the potential. Nehemiah here, he had to have vision to look at the rubble and to see what the potential could have been. Nehemiah needed to look at that rubble and see beyond it. It reminds me of Proverbs 29 and 18 from the Old King James, where it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. Now, what is it that's within your life? Do you have a vision for your life? Do you have those plans? Nehemiah, we talked about it, that he planned his steps before the Lord and he allowed the Lord to direct his path. But if there is no vision, then the people will perish. Now, Nehemiah, he took a few men with him, but the others, he told nobody about what he was doing. He writes, I did not tell anyone what God had put on my mind for Jerusalem. And that small, apparently insignificant phrase, there is volumes and volumes of wisdom behind that. Be careful who you let into your plans, because lots of people would love to offer their 2 cents. And let me tell you, not everyone's 2 cents is as valuable as everyone else's. It doesn't always mean that their 2 cents is good advice. I'm sure Sanballat and Tobiah, the bad guys in our story, they would have loved to encourage, quote unquote, Nehemiah. They would have loved to encourage him and give him their 2 cents each. But not every single person that you allow into your life to speak truth into your life, they're not going to speak truth, first of all. Second of all, it's not going to be helpful for you. Nehemiah only had a few men with him before he told the masses. Now, you should find those who are going to give you biblical, good, sound counsel and allow them to speak into those problems that are within your life. But here's the word of caution for you, is that you as a Christian should avoid shopping, quote unquote, shopping for advice, asking many people and telling them your problems until you find someone who's going to tell you the exact advice that you want to hear. I would caution you guys against shopping for wisdom, shopping for counsel, shopping for advice. Well, I asked my pastor for some biblical advice and I didn't really like what he said to me. So instead, I went to my coworkers and my friends and my neighbor until I got the answer that I wanted. then I just went with that. Right? That's a dangerous place to be in. And I caution you guys against it because this right here, this is the only truth, and this is what's going to lead you to life. This word right here. Be careful the type of advice that you're taking in. Now, capture this with me. That in verse 13, I like what it says in the New Living Translation. Verse 13, Nehemiah inspected the walls. He took time to gather all of the facts, to fact find before he took any kind of action. And this is part of our theme within the book of Nehemiah, that he agonized before he organized, that he took that time to look across the city, probably with tears in his eyes as he saw all of the rubble, and he agonized before he organized, even though in those 3 days to assess the situation. Now, get this, that the word that he used for inspect, it's actually a medical term. And in the Hebrew language, it's a word that means a probing of a wound to see the extent of the damage. You're probing a wound to see how badly the cut is, how badly the damage is, so that you can evaluate what kind of medical treatment is necessary here. Now, a good leader will always take time to assess the need and examine the facts to see the extent of the damage. It's good to sit down and assess your life. It's good to see where you're at in every single corner and aspect of your life and just see what needs help, what area of your life needs assistance, what area of your life needs prayer, what area of your life needs to be given up to the Lord. It's good to take that time to slow down and assess where you're at before the Lord. Now, Nehemiah, he walked around the whole city, and in that time, he saw every single entrance point and exit point, assessing the damage to see exactly what would need to be done with the work. Now, what are the areas of your life that you feel like are falling apart, that need that extra tender love and care, that need that attention, that need God's help and provision? Idea number 3 for our study is, who gave you the approval? Wrapping up our study, looking at verse 17, all the way to the end of the chapter, here's what it says. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste, and its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And then I told them, the hand of my God, which has been good upon me, and also of the king's words that he has spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to the good work. But, here's our bad guys again, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite, and Geshem, the Arabs, see now they got a third guy, they always travel in packs and they always expand. Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. Now, in this chapter, we see Nehemiah, he transforms. He transforms and takes off one hat and puts on another. He takes off the hat of a cupbearer and puts on the hat of a construction foreman, of an engineer. And the people were very excited to get to work. They said, let's rise up and build. They saw their need. They saw how desperate they were in the situation, and they wanted to put their hands to the plow and work. Now, building the wall for them required a couple of things. Without any of these things, they failed in their mission to build this wall. Number one, they had to look at the problem. They needed to understand the scope of where they're at as a nation and the current condition of the wall. Number two, they needed to listen to the solution. It's not any good for you to know of a massive problem within your life if you're not willing to take any action. You're not willing to follow after the solution that you need in order to make yourself right before God. And number three, you had to follow by faith. Why? Because this is God's work, and God is using us in a great way, just like he used Nehemiah to accomplish his purposes. It's God's work. So is a requirement of faith. Now, the wall itself was about 35 acres of land, so they knew that it was a heavy lift. But Nehemiah was able to motivate them and encourage them. Now, notice that when he spoke to the people, he used words like us and we. Those were the verbs that he used. He didn't say you guys or figure it out by yourself. It would have been easy for Nehemiah to come in and say, I'm just getting here. This is my 4th day here, and I'm Nehemiah. I'm an expert at these things. I have been serving in the king's court for so many years, and I've seen lots of building projects. Now, you people have a problem. In fact, you are the problem. And you better fix this wall or you're going to keep having a problem. Now, you guys get to work, and I'm going to go back to my office. He could have done that, but he didn't at all. He identified himself with the problem before God helped him to become part of the solution. He understood that criticism squelches motivation, but when Nehemiah identified with the people, it encouraged motivation. He's saying, I'm with you. Let's do this together. We have this big need, that the need that's within your life is the same that's within my life. Now, get this, follow me on this, that it happens a lot in marriage. Right? In our marriages, we'll see where one party of the marriage will always say, it's not my fault, it's always her fault. Everyone knows it except for her. Right? And we have these battles within marriages, and it's a if-only syndrome. And what I mean by that is that one party says, well, if only he would do X, then I would do Z. Right? If only she was sweeter to me, then I would do this. Now, if you only would allow yourself to see your faults within the marriage, if you want to truly see change within your marriage, you need to understand that you're part of the problem. And you need to give that to the Lord and allow the Lord to help work out those details within your marriage. It even happens in churches, right? Churches are no different. If only these guys did this, then I would be more engaged within the church. Watch this. If only pastors would do exactly as I wanted to, then I would submit to their leadership. I don't think it really works that way. Sorry. But Nehemiah, he was a good leader. Why? Because he pointed out the need, and then he identified with that need. He pointed out the need and how much this affected and impacted their life. And then he said, I'm right there with you guys. Now take a look at verse 19 and 20 again. It says this, but when Sanballat, the Horonite, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us, and they despised us, and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we, his servants, will arise and build, but you will have no heritage or rights or memorial in Jerusalem. Now, we are going to face opposition. As a Christian, you will naturally face opposition when you serve the Lord. It's been said that if you're not facing criticism, you're probably not doing anything. So take heart that if you're facing criticism, okay, maybe that's a sign that you're on the right track. But when you answer the call to God and when you take those steps of faith, when you're going to follow and obey the Lord, you're putting a target on your back, and your enemy is going to try and discourage you from continuing on the work. You have to be ready to be in the arena. You have to be ready to face and deal with that opposition. Now notice, the opposition comes right away. As soon as the men of the town, as soon as Nehemiah casts the vision and all of the guys roll up their sleeves and they're ready to get to work, the very moment that happens, the opposition comes. And that's always how it works. Now, part of the unwritten job requirements and job descriptions of a leader is that you have to have the ability to handle criticism. You have to. And every single person in this room, you're a leader in one way, shape, or form. Either within your work, either within your church, within your household, within your sphere of friends, that you have a limit of influence that you have upon their lives. And part of being a leader is the ability to handle criticism. Now, how does Nehemiah respond? How did he respond to these guys who were attacking him, who were trying to drain all of his energy? Is that he didn't engage with them and waste his energy or lose focus, but he had self-control. And he understood that, hey, I am here, and I am here for one reason and one reason only, and that's because the Lord God told me to be here. He was definitive in that. In fact, it's a very fitting verse. But in Proverbs 25 and 28, it says, a person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. A very fitting verse. But when you don't have that self-control within your life, you then become vulnerable. And Nehemiah was not willing to place himself in the place of vulnerability when he knew the seriousness of the work that he was in. Now, these three irritations for Nehemiah, these guys, Geshem, Tobiah, Sanballat, they were all irritations, and they're trying to gaslight him. They're trying to trick him into thinking that he was rebelling against the king. Now, they could clearly see Nehemiah. He came into town. He rode in with the king's escort, with soldiers within the king's army and horsemen. They saw that he had resources that only the king could give them. And yet they still tried to gaslight Nehemiah and say, well, are you going to rebel against the king? And those who attack the work of God, I want you to know this, those who attack the work of God, they never really care about the truth. The truth really doesn't matter to them. So please don't miss this. Don't miss this. That Nehemiah, he could have just pulled out his royal decrees and his approvals from the king. When they asked him the question, are you going to rebel against the king? He could have pulled it all out and said, no, I have my paperwork, I have my documents, everything is set. The king is on my side. The king is giving me the resources that I need. He could have done that and just blown them up and said, no. But instead, what he does is he says, God will prosper us. He puts all of his authority on God. It doesn't matter what man approved of me. It doesn't matter if the king approved of me or not. It doesn't matter if you guys even approve of what I do or not. The only thing that matters is, does God approve of me? Does God approve of Nehemiah? Does God want this for Nehemiah? He said, God will prosper us. You know, the definition of approval is something that is good enough or acceptable. That is the definition of approval. Now, Nehemiah understood that God approved of him. And so he based his identity on this approval from God and not the approval of man. Nehemiah understood that when he had these voices of dissent, that he wouldn't listen to them and it wouldn't stop the work that was set before him. Psalm 118:6, it says, the Lord is for me, so I will have no fear. What can mere people do to me? When God is on your side, who's going to be able to stand against you? When you are with God, when God is with you, then you are the majority. It doesn't matter if you're alone on an island. You are the majority if God is with you. Now capture this. These men, they laughed. They laughed at Nehemiah for doing the will of God, for seeking after the well-being of the nation. They laughed at him. You know, the first American steamboat, it sailed from New York City to New York, Albany, and it took 32 hours. And when people heard about that, they laughed. Said, man, this is never going to catch on. These steamboats, they're just a novelty thing. The first automobile, it was passed by a horse and buggy, and the people in the wagon, they laughed. They said, man, this automobile thing is never going to catch on. You know, the first airplane that took off, after 59 seconds, it hit the ground, and people laughed at it. And in the same way, Nehemiah said, let's build the wall. And people laughed. People laughed at him. Understand this, that the Bible tells us not to despise the day of small beginnings. What are the habits that are within your life that you're maybe just developing right now of okay, now I'm spending time and reading my devotion and seeking the Lord and praying. Those habits that you're just developing, don't despise the day of small things, because those habits, as they grow, they can expand and they become much bigger. But don't despise the day of small things, the day that God has given to you. And if you are faithful with the little, God says that he will be faithful to give you more. He is good to us in that way. He also promises in Philippians 1:6 that whatever good work he starts, he is faithful to bring to completion. Now, Nehemiah was being used to finish the work of restoration within a nation. He was being used to fulfill this verse right here that whatever God starts, God is faithful to finish. And in the same way, God is not done with you. God is faithful that if he has started a good work in you, if he starts to speak within your life, that he's going to bring that to completion. He's going to to mature in you and grow in you. Why don't you guys start wrapping up with me? I'll call the worship team back up.